The rain had not stopped for 2 days. I watched it streak the carriage window in thin gray lines as the wheels swallowed mile after mile of road, carrying me further from everything I had ever known and closer to a man whose face I could barely remember. We had met once, at my cousin Harriet's autumn dinner. He had sat across the table and said perhaps 12 words to me. His eyes had been pale and assessing, the kind of eyes that counted things. 3 weeks later, his solicitor arrived at my door with a formal letter of proposal. My name is Eleanor Voss. I was 23 years old, the daughter of a country solicitor who had died in January, leaving behind a desk full of unpaid debts and a house that was not truly ours. The creditors had been patient for 4 months. They would not be patient much longer. So when the Duke of Ashmore proposed, I said yes, because there are moments in a woman's life when survival and dignity cannot both be preserved at once, and I had chosen survival. I was not foolish enough to call it a love match. I was not romantic enough to pretend I did not know exactly what was happening. A duke needed an heir and perhaps a manageable wife. I needed a roof that would not be auctioned from over my head. These were the plain facts of it, and I had made my peace with them during the long, sleepless nights since I accepted. What I had not made peace with was the haste, 3 weeks from proposal to wedding. No courtship, no visits. A brief, formal letter stating the date and asking me to come to Ashmore Park, where we would be married in the family chapel the following morning. The carriage turned through iron gates as evening fell, and the house appeared through the rain like something from a cautionary tale. It was enormous and dark, all stone and shadow, with towers that rose against the gray sky like fingers reaching up to warn me away. Every window was narrow. Every light inside seemed dim, as though the house was conserving something. A woman was waiting beneath the portico as the carriage stopped. She was perhaps 50, dressed in severe black, her expression arranged into something that fell well short of welcome. "Miss Voss, I am Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper. His Grace is not yet returned from London. He expects to be here by morning for the ceremony." She said this without apology, as though it were entirely ordinary for a man to miss his bride's arrival the night before their wedding. "I see," I said, because I did not yet know what else to say. "I will show you to your rooms. His Grace asks that you take dinner there tonight. He prefers you rest after your journey. Prefers I remain in my rooms." I noted the word, not suggests, prefers, as though my movements were already a matter of his preference. I followed Mrs. Croft through the entrance hall and up a staircase wide enough to drive a cart through. The house smelled of beeswax and old wood and something underneath both of those things, something I could not name. Neglect, perhaps, or grief. She led me to the south wing and opened a set of double doors. The rooms inside were beautiful in an abandoned way. Blue damask drapes, faded nearly to silver. A canopied bed dressed in linen that had been folded too long. A writing desk by the tall window. A fireplace with a fire that had only just been lit, still fighting to take hold. These were the late Duchess's chambers, Mrs. Croft said. She offered nothing further, as though the sentence explained itself. Late Duchess, the first wife. I had heard almost nothing about her, only that she had died 2 years ago and that the Duke had been a widower since. No one seemed to speak of her by name. "What was she called?" I asked. Mrs. Croft paused at the door. "Lady Rosalind. Lady Rosalind Harwick, before her marriage." She curtsied slightly and left. I stood alone in the rooms of a dead woman and listened to the rain. I did not unpack immediately. Instead, I moved through the chambers slowly. The way you might walk through a place you suspected was important without yet understanding why. The dressing table held a few hairpins still in the tray, as though Lady Rosalind had stepped out and simply never returned to collect them. A book sat on the nightstand, a ribbon marking a page never finished. Above the fireplace hung a portrait. She had been lovely. Dark eyes, dark hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck, a composed expression that might have been contentment or might have been performance. She wore sapphires at her throat and her hands were folded in her lap. She looked like a woman who had learned to appear very still. I studied her face for a long moment, feeling the particular loneliness of looking at someone who could no longer speak. It was when I turned to examine the window latch that I noticed the portrait was crooked, not dramatically, just a degree or two to the left, as though someone had lifted it from the wall recently and replaced it without quite getting it straight. It was the kind of thing you would never notice unless you were looking closely at everything, which I was, because I was a solicitor's daughter and I had learned early that details matter. I went to the portrait and straightened it. Then I paused. I lifted it down from the wall entirely. The plaster behind it was marked. Words scratched in a thin, desperate hand, the kind of writing that comes not from a desk but from urgency. Find the will. The T is poison. He watches everything. Find the will. I set the portrait down against the hearth. My hands were steadier than I expected, which surprised me. Perhaps steadiness is what the body does when the mind is too frightened to function. A sound at the door made me turn sharply. A young woman stood in the doorway, perhaps 17, with dark circles beneath her eyes and a maid's uniform that seemed to belong to someone slightly larger. She was looking at the wall where the portrait had been. "I hoped you would find it," she said quietly. "I was afraid to tell you directly in case they were listening. The walls in this house carry sound in strange directions." "Are you?" She came inside and pulled the door shut behind her. "My name is Dora. I was Lady Rosalind's personal maid for 2 years. I was with her when she died." She paused. "I was with her when she knew she was dying." I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs were suggesting it. "Tell me." Dora told me. Lady Rosalind Harwick had married the Duke of Ashmore 3 years ago. She was an heiress, the only child of a wealthy mill owner from the north of England, and she had come into the marriage with £30,000 settled on her by her father's will. Under law, upon marriage, that fortune became the Duke's. What the Duke had not known, Dora said, was that Lady Rosalind had made her own will before the wedding. She had gone to a solicitor in a town 40 miles away, a man she had known since girlhood, and she had left instructions that in the event of her death, the money was to pass not to her husband but to her brother Thomas Harwick, currently living in Edinburgh. The Duke had discovered the will existed some months into the marriage. He could not find it, but he knew it was real because Rosalind's solicitor had confirmed its existence when pressed. "She told me she had overheard him," Dora said. "He and his man of business talking in his study late at night. She had come down for a book. She heard them say her name. They said the will was a problem. They said the brother was a problem. They said the matter would need to be resolved." "Resolved how?" Dora's expression gave the answer without her having to speak it. 3 months after that overheard conversation, Lady Rosalind began to feel ill. A low fever that would not break. Fatigue so deep she could barely sit upright. Dora had brought her meals and teas prescribed by the household physician, a man who came at the Duke's summons and left prescriptions that seemed, to Dora's inexperienced eye, to make her mistress worse rather than better. Lady Rosalind had whispered to Dora, in her final week, that the tea tasted of metal, that she had stopped drinking it but the illness continued anyway because she had drunk so much of it by then that it hardly mattered, that she had hidden the will somewhere in these rooms. That Dora should tell no one, not until there was someone who could actually help. Lady Rosalind died on a Thursday morning in November. Her brother Thomas had come south for the funeral. He had been gone by Saturday, leaving with only black crepe and condolences and no answers. "Why did you not tell the brother?" I asked. "About what she suspected about the will." "I tried," Dora said. "But he had the Duke at his elbow every moment. And I am a maid, miss, who was going to listen to me accuse a duke of murder with nothing but my word and a dead woman's whisper." She folded her hands in her lap. "I have been waiting 2 years for someone I thought might listen. You do not seem like a woman who is entirely without resource." I looked at her for a long moment. "Why is the Duke marrying me? I have nothing. Nothing. I heard Mrs. Croft talking to the head footman last month. Your father had a life insurance bond. £20 a month for 20 years, payable to his estate upon death, which passes to you as sole heir. It was administered through a firm in Bristol. The Duke's man of business located it after your father's death." She paused. "It amounts to nearly £14,000. £1,000. My father, who had fretted constantly about leaving me with nothing, had quietly arranged for exactly this. He had never told me. Perhaps he had not wanted to give me false comfort. Perhaps he had simply been the kind of careful, methodical man who did these things without announcement. The Duke knew about it. He had found it before he even sent his proposal. I stood up. "Need to find the will," I said. Dora nodded. "She hid it somewhere she said he would never look. She said it had to be somewhere personal, somewhere that meant something to her and nothing to him." I thought about the words on the wall. Find the will. She had written that knowing someone would stand exactly where I was standing. She had written it as instruction, not confession. Lady Rosalind had been frightened and dying, and she had still thought clearly enough to leave a path. I searched methodically, every drawer of the writing desk, pulling them out and running my hands beneath. The back panels of the wardrobe, the lining of a hat box on the upper shelf, beneath the hearthrug, inside the pages of the unfinished book on the nightstand. Nothing. I went back to the portrait, which still leaned against the hearth. I looked at it for a long time. She had written the warning behind the portrait. She had known someone would lift it, but she had not put the will behind it because that would have been too obvious, too easily found by the wrong person first. I picked the portrait up and turned it over. I examined the back of the canvas. I ran my fingers along the frame, the full perimeter of it, pressing gently. On the lower left corner, the molding gave slightly. I pressed harder. A section of the carved frame swung inward on a tiny hinge, not more than 2 inches of it, revealing a hollow space inside the frame's depth. Inside the space, folded into quarters and wrapped in a strip of blue ribbon, was a document. My fingers shook slightly as I unfolded it. The last will and testament of Rosalind Mary Ashmore, Duchess of Ashmore, née Harwick. Everything to her brother Thomas in the event of her death, including all personal property and the fortune settled upon her prior to marriage. A separate sealed letter, tucked behind the will itself, was addressed to a magistrate in Derbyshire, a man named Fortescue, whom Lady Rosalind described as an old friend of her father's and a man she believed to be genuinely independent. It described everything: the overheard conversation, the physician's visits, the taste of the tea, the way she had felt herself growing worse in ways that did not match the illness she was told she had. She wrote that she did not know if the letter would ever reach Fortescue, but that she was leaving it with the will in the hope that whoever found one would carry the other. I folded both documents carefully and tucked them inside my traveling bag. "I need to leave tonight," I said to Dora. "He has men at the gate, 2 of them all night. He always does when he has guests." She met my eyes. "But the kitchen garden wall can be climbed in one place, near the old yew tree. Behind the wall is a lane that runs to the village. From the village there is a mail coach at 5 in the morning. Will you come with me?" She shook her head. "If I disappear the same night you do, they will know I helped you. If I stay, I am just a maid whose mistress ran away. He has less reason to harm me." She reached into her apron pocket and pressed something into my hand. A small folded note. "Thomas Harwick. That is his address in Edinburgh. He deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know the will exists." I put the note in my bag with the documents. At midnight, when the house was dark and quiet and even the rain had slowed to a murmur, I crept down the back stairs in my traveling dress with my bag held against my chest. The kitchen was empty. The garden door was unlocked. I moved through the wet darkness to the kitchen garden and found the yew tree and climbed the wall with considerably less grace than I might have wished, tearing my hem on the stones. I was in the lane. I walked quickly. The village was further than it had seemed on the journey in. I was perhaps 50 yards from the kitchen garden gate when a lantern swung around the corner of the path ahead of me and a voice said, pleasantly and entirely without warmth, "Miss Voss. What a singular hour for a walk." The Duke of Ashmore held the lantern at shoulder height. He was younger than I had prepared myself for, perhaps 38, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if there had been anything warm behind it. His eyes in the lantern light were the pale green of old glass, flat and evaluating. "Your Grace," I said, "I could not sleep. I needed air. With your traveling bag." He stepped closer. "You found something." Rosalind always was sentimental about hiding things. I knew they were there. I was never quite patient enough to find them. He looked at my bag. The will, I imagine, and whatever she left with it. I did not confirm or deny it. I was doing rapid calculations of the kind my father had always praised me for. "Will names her brother as heir," I said. "Her brother is alive. The will was made before the marriage by a solicitor 40 miles from here whose records still exist. A magistrate named Fortescue in Derbyshire was personally known to Lady Rosalind's father. There is a letter addressed to him inside this bag. Duke's expression did not change, which was its own kind of answer. None of that proves anything, he said. Perhaps not in a courtroom tonight. But the story does not need to win in court tonight. It only needs to reach the newspapers. I kept my voice level. My father was a solicitor. I know 3 journalists through his professional association, men who wrote about legal cases and local scandals for regional papers. I wrote to one of them this afternoon before dinner. Everything Dora told me, everything I found in those rooms, I wrote it all in a letter and I put it in the outgoing post with the footman who went to the village at 4 o'clock. It was partly true. I had written the letter. Whether it had been posted, I was not entirely certain. The Duke studied me with those pale, flat eyes. "If that letter exists," he said carefully, "and if it reaches a journalist, a story about a dead duchess and suspicions of poison becomes considerably more difficult to manage. Especially if a second duchess dies shortly after the story is published," I said. "The first death might be explained away. 2 would be a pattern. And patterns, Your Grace, are what solicitors and journalists and eventually juries are trained to notice." Silence between us was long enough that the rain, which had slowed to almost nothing, started again. "What do you want?" he asked. "To leave. Tonight, unharmed. I will take the will to Thomas Harwick. I will give Lady Rosalind's letter to Magistrate Fortescue. After that, it is in the hands of people better positioned than me to pursue it. I am only the messenger. In exchange, I will not go directly to Fleet Street. Whether the journalists pursue the story based on my earlier letter is beyond my control, but I will not personally accelerate it." He considered this for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. I was very aware of how quiet the lane was. "You will sign a document," he said finally, "stating that the engagement ended by mutual agreement, that you make no allegations regarding the late Duchess, that whatever you believe you found in those rooms reflects only a sick woman's delusions and nothing more. Will sign that you and I parted by mutual agreement and that I make no personal claims against your estate," I said. "I will not sign away Lady Rosalind's evidence. That belongs to her brother." Another silence. "Go," he said. His solicitor was woken and brought to the Duke's study. I signed a document in the lamplight with hands I kept deliberately still, because I would not let him see them shake. Then I walked out of Ashmore Park through the front gate, which the Duke had ordered opened, and I did not look back at the house. The mail coach to London left at 5 past 5. I was on it. I found work in London within the fortnight, as a secretary's assistant to a firm of solicitors in Holborn, which was fitting in ways I chose to find darkly amusing. I kept Lady Rosalind's will and her letter to Magistrate Fortescue hidden inside the lining of my trunk. I wrote to Thomas Harwick in Edinburgh within a week of arriving in London. I described everything simply and clearly, the way my father had taught me to write: facts first, emotion after, and only if it served clarity. He wrote back 12 days later. He had not known about the will. He had always suspected something was wrong with his sister's illness and death, but had found no handhold to grip, no place to put the weight of his suspicion. My letter, he said, had given him both. He went to Magistrate Fortescue. Fortescue, who had known Rosalind's father for 30 years and had attended her christening, read her letter with what Thomas described as an expression of controlled fury. He began a quiet inquiry. It took 4 months. The inquiry was quiet because Fortescue was careful, not because he lacked conviction. He located the solicitor who had drawn up Rosalind's will. He found the physician who had treated her, and, applying sufficient pressure, discovered that the man had been paid by the Duke's man of business to confirm fever as the cause of death without thorough examination. He found purchase records for a substance that, in the right quantities and administered over time, produced exactly the symptoms Rosalind had described in her letter. The Duke of Ashmore was arrested on a Tuesday in October. I read about it in the morning papers over my desk in Holborn. The article was careful with its language, speaking of suspected foul play and ongoing inquiry, but it named him plainly, and it would not be the last such article. He did not stand trial. He died in custody 3 weeks after his arrest, of what the prison physician called a failure of the heart. There were people who found that convenient and people who found it just, and I suspected both assessments were correct simultaneously. Thomas Harwick wrote to me when it was over. He had received a portion of his sister's estate after lengthy legal proceedings, considerably reduced by the Duke's accumulated debts and the costs of the inquiry, but real nonetheless. He had used part of it to establish a small fund in Rosalind's name, administered through a women's charity in Edinburgh that helped women in desperate circumstances access legal advice. He enclosed a separate note. Asterisk Rosalind would have liked you, it said. She was practical too. She believed in leaving clear instructions. Asterisk I still have the portrait. I asked Thomas if he wanted it, and he said he had other portraits of her, happier ones from before the marriage. He thought it should stay with whoever had found what was hidden behind it. So it hangs now in my rooms in Clerkenwell, a little crooked because I cannot quite get it straight, and sometimes in the evenings I look at her composed, careful face and think about what it costs to be very still in a dangerous place. What it requires, what it takes from you over time. Rosalind Harwick had been frightened, dying, and systematically deceived, and she had still thought clearly enough to hide the truth where it could be found. She had still believed in her final weeks that someone would look. That someone would carry what she had left. She had not known my name. She had not known me at all. But she had written her warning and hidden her evidence and folded her hope into a hollow frame, and she had trusted that whoever came after her would be worth trusting. I hope I proved her right. I think on the whole that I did Eleanor's fight for justice and her own survival move you. Like this video if you believe the truth can outlast the people who try to bury it. Comment below. Would you have confronted the Duke or slipped away quietly? What would you have done with Rosalind's letter? Subscribe for more stories of hidden wills, dangerous marriages, and women who refuse to be silenced. Share with anyone who needs reminding that courage and clear thinking together can move even the heaviest stones. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story.